COVID support and all those other things. But one of my main areas of focus is the startups part of that plan. And a key piece of that is to facilitate at least 650 introductions between startups or scaling companies and GLI investors or corporations over a 5-year period. In past years, we operated an ESO in Louisville called Enterprise Core. So we uniquely understand that startups, in order to succeed, they have to secure those first customers and develop that stream of revenue. So as the panel name implies, oh, can you all hear me? Yes, sorry, thought I was breaking up there. So as the panel name implies today, collaborate to innovate. Partnerships between established corporations and startups can deliver innovation necessary to transform large organizations. These innovation partnerships are commonplace in Silicon Valley, where startups provide large corporations early access to that innovation that can propel organizations forward, delivering competitive advantage and industry leadership. Startups also benefit from these partnerships, allowing them to validate their product, secure referenceable customers, and decrease their dependence on outside equity. So you may ask why these are important for Greater Louisville. Technology startups are the future job growth engine in Louisville, and our local corporations are leaders in their industry that want to drive digital transformation and disrupt their industry. From healthcare to food and beverage and banking, our local corporations are poised to benefit from our local innovation. And it's time that we join these forces to accelerate corporate innovation through digital transformation, leveraging agile startups, disruptive technology. Silicon Valley does not have a lock on competitive advantage from innovation. So today, I'm excited. We're going to learn from a very impressive panel of executives representing large corporations and early stage startups. All of our panelists come with extensive experience in driving collaborations between large organizations and tech startups. They're very well versed on the benefits, the risks, the challenges, and the rewards of that collaboration. So they will share with you their perspective on the hows and the whys, the do's and the don'ts of collaboration for innovation. So first off, I would like to introduce Detlef Schultz. Our first panel member brings a wealth of experience in successfully bridging the gap between large corporations and innovative early stage startups. As current chairman of the board of Vodafone Procurement Company, and for the previous 13 years as its CEO, Detlef led a digital transformation to an operation that today is recognized as one of the best in the world, managing an annual spend of $22 billion, that's with a B, with 10,800 suppliers. And for people that are not familiar, Vodafone is a public, European-based global leader in the telecommunication industry with revenue exceeding $54 billion. It's the largest mobile operator in Europe and the largest IoT connectivity provider in the world. He brings this expertise in corporate startup collaboration to large organizations, coaching them on how to drive strategic, data-driven digital transformation. He's also an advisor and private investor in early stage tech startups, including C-Plan.IT, who is also represented on our panel today. He's a co-founder of Akiro Labs, a cloud SaaS startup. I probably said that wrong, but this is not my world, filling the white space in strategic procurement beyond category management. He's going to share with us his best practices on how corporations and startups can work together to drive mutually beneficial outcomes. Next up with us today is Jason Zachariah. He is the COO and president of Kindred Healthcare here in Louisville. For people not familiar, Kindred is the nation's leading specialty hospital company, delivering acute health services in its long-term acute care hospitals, inpatient rehabilitation hospitals, acute rehabilitation units, and behavioral health line of business, all specializing in treating the most medically complex patients. It generates about $3 billion in revenue with about 100,000 employees, and its major shareholders are leading private equity firms, San Francisco-based TPG Capital and New York-based Welsh, Carson, Anderson, and Stowe. Kindred operates a diverse blend of healthcare service businesses, including transitional care hospitals and inpatient rehabilitation hospitals in approximately 327 locations across 35 states. It's ranked as one of Fortune magazine's most admired healthcare companies for 9 years. Kindred's mission is to help patients reach their highest potential for health and healing with intensive medical and rehabilitative care through compassionate patient experience. Jason joined Kindred 15 years ago, and he is accountable for the strategic, operating, and financial performance of Kindred's operating statements, their hospital division, rehabilitation services, and behavioral health. So our next panelist, Lorenzo Martinelli, brings 25 years of startup experience from Silicon Valley, having been on the founding team of 4 enterprise software startups, including 2 that went from zero to successful IPO. Lorenzo is currently chairman and founder of his latest startup, C-Plan.IT, which is based both in Silicon Valley and Louisville. C-Plan.IT helps organizations measure and maximize the ROI from digital technology investments. He has successfully driven innovation partnership programs between his startups and progressive corporations, including Vodafone and Kindred. Sound like there's a connection here? And those resulted in leading edge solutions as well as successful startups. I am very excited as I know all the great work he's doing, and excited that he's going to share his startup perspective on why and how to engage with large corporations as innovation partners, including how to avoid pitfalls and structure the relationship for success. Last but certainly not least, our last panelist today, Tammy York-Day, brings a very unique perspective to the corporate startup partnerships. Tammy is president and CEO of the Louisville Healthcare CEO Council. She works with 12 CEOs from some of the largest, most innovative, and most compassionate healthcare companies in the country, who happen to be based in Louisville, including panel member Kindred Healthcare. These companies are the titans in the industry, collectively representing over 400,000 employees and $100 billion in revenue. So as Louisville is home to more major healthcare and aging innovation companies than anywhere in the world, they are uniquely positioned to build on that success by offering the expertise, investment, and environment for new and existing businesses to flourish. Their goal is to foster collaboration in the sector to create jobs, spur innovation, and increase investment in Louisville's healthcare economy. Through the LHCC Innovation Engine, Tammy brings the perspective of both the CEO Council members as well as the early and growth stage innovators who are mentored through the process of collaboration. Having seen the process from both sides, Tammy will share with you what really makes those collaborations successful. Before joining the Louisville Healthcare CEO Council as the inaugural president and CEO, Tammy spent 18 years in the healthcare insurance industry, most recently as Chief Operating Officer of Delta Dental, one of the nation's largest dental benefits delivery systems, providing dental coverage to over 80 million people. So I think you can see today we have a unique opportunity to hear 4 very unique perspectives on a very important topic: collaborate to innovate, successful corporate startup partnering. So now I'm going to hand things over to our first panelist, Detlef Schultz.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you very much for the kind introduction and the invitation to this panel on a subject which is close to my heart, the collaboration and successful partnering between startup companies and large and mature companies. Before I go into the details of this subject, allow me to take you back in time, because I think that helps you to understand where I'm coming from. I grew up in Germany, and after the university in Germany, I did work for a company called Siemens. And Siemens back then was already more than 150 years old. It was a very well-structured company with very well-defined roles and responsibilities, with rules and regulations for everything. Each process step even was defined in detail. So there were no open questions and there was no ambiguity in the company. In '98, I had the opportunity to move into the Silicon Valley and to work with a company called Applied Materials, the Applied Materials company is doing semiconductor equipment and is the largest in the world. That company back then was around 30 years old, so rather young in comparison to where I came from. And the company was driven clearly by innovation. So innovation was everything in the company. And what I found in Applied was basically exactly the opposite of what I was used to in Siemens. And let me quote somebody who calls himself the procurement punk, Stéphane Chessaillon de Bordet. He said, the Silicon Valley is not a location, but a mindset. And that is something I would sign up to 100% because it was a complete contrast to my old world. There was a culture and still is a culture of failing forward. Mistakes are allowed, even encouraged, and tolerated as long as you don't make the same mistake twice. Ambiguity is daily existent, and there is a just do it attitude in a very competitive environment. And to be quite honest, it took me a while to get accustomed to this kind of behavior in this kind of environment. But when I returned to Europe and back into the UK, I took two things back. One of which was that stakeholder management is extremely essential. And the second one was that you have to make data speak. And what I mean to say with that is not only the KPIs and the achievement of your goals and objectives, but the story behind it and why targets are important and why achieving those targets is good for your customers and stakeholders. So with that, I entered into a new phase of my career at Vodafone in the UK, in England. And from 2003 onwards, my role was to establish a global supply chain management. The very first thing I had to do was to establish data transparency and to establish the basics because we didn't have much data. Vodafone back then had around 150 different ERP systems, and just to get spend analytics about the spend in procurement, I had to tap into all of these ERP systems, which was kind of impossible. And this leads me to my first experience with a startup because we were looking for somebody who was building an overlay to get into all those ERPs, extract the data we needed for the spend analytics. And we worked with a company from the Silicon Valley, which was called E2Open. This is where I know Lorenzo from, who was back then with E2Open. And this also was one of the reasons why I later decided to invest in C-Plan.IT. So E2Open helped us to get the extraction of all these ERP systems. In 2006, then, the transformation went further. Vodafone decided to establish and implement one single ERP. So basically to get the one version of the truth, to establish one culture, and to have one set of goals and objectives. All of this led then in 2008 to the establishment of the Vodafone Procurement Company in Luxembourg, where we centralized the entire spend across 4 continents and roughly 26 different companies. Rebecca mentioned the amount of spend. I had back then, I believe, 25 billion euros around. And I just tell you because this magnitude, because that makes clear why it was difficult to work with startup companies. Because at the same time, we worked with a software as a service startup company to help us to implement contract management, contract lifecycle management. We were the 4th customer for this company, so you can imagine that worlds came together, this huge Vodafone and this small company. And what do I learn out of those collaborations with startups, which, by the way, were successful? So the very first lesson is don't apply the usual way of doing things. And as an example, the typical Vodafone contract with our vendors had 150 different pages, And if you come with 150 different pages to a startup company, which might not even have a lawyer, you simply kill them. So we had to simplify the contract world. We got it down to a slim version of maybe 8 pages. And that was how we worked with startup companies. Everything else would scare them away. Also, sometimes a simple handshake deal might be sufficient. Please be clear about roles and responsibilities to make the collaboration with startup companies easier. And as a corporation, I think it's important to understand that you have to take calculated risks. I call them always submarines because when we started a project, we went for limited financial exposure. When it worked well, we scaled it up and secured the bragging rights. And as an example, another one, you all know DocuSign, electronic signature processing. In Vodafone, we had in the procurement world with every vendor various contracts. So you can imagine that we had thousands of pages of contracts, which we replaced to electronic signature. And when it worked in procurement, we expanded this into the entire company. So what we do basically, if it's successful, you let it pop up and then you make it larger. Let's touch quickly on the digital transformation, because that's a subject Rebecca touched on as well. There is, in my opinion, a difference between digitization and digitalization. Digitization is just the conversion of a formerly analog process into a digital process. And digitalization is the invention and the establishment of entirely new business processes which add additional value. Often these new processes are invented by startup companies which are much more agile and which are not having any legacy they have to take care of. And why do we undergo this digital transformation? Because our customers are requesting us to be much faster, to display speed and agility and have turbo fast processes, because that's what they are used to. So there is a cultural change required. We basically have to challenge the status quo, and we have to figure out how we can do things differently to satisfy and exceed customers' expectations. So since startups often have the response for this, we got to figure out how we can take advantage of this new thinking. And Vodafone established for that specific purpose an innovation center, which is run by Procurement. It's a separate company in the form of a joint venture with the Luxembourgish government. And in that company, we're hosting mature startups and help them to commercialize their products. The CEO of that company is a very seasoned Vodafone executive who has a huge network and can help them to get successful in Vodafone and beyond. So they have basically a mentor within Vodafone who helps them to make it through the Vodafone jungle and place their ideas successfully and commercialize their products. Let me, to end my 10 minutes, also talk about something where I'm looking at the successful collaboration in a startup environment from the other side, because I'm the co-founder of Akira Labs, a company which takes advantage of artificial intelligence and digital analytics, data analytics, to fill the white space in strategic procurement. And here we invited large companies to what we call a customer advisory board. This customer advisory board consists of 10 very big companies, DAX 30, FTSE 100, etc., who pay a fee to be members in this customer advisory board. This fee then will be discounted against the serial product, but I think it's important to have skin in the game and to give them the opportunity to make their requirements heard so that we can embed them early into the product and define together with them what we call a minimum delightable product. So in conclusion, I would say whatever you do with the startup environment and community, be pragmatic in your approach. There is a variety of possibilities to structure the collaboration between mature and startup companies. And I think it's important that we always keep in mind why we are driving innovation, why we are going through any form of transformation, because it's always to exceed the expectation of our customers. Thank you very much. And back to you, Rebecca.
Thank you for that, Detlef. Obviously, very good advice, and coming from someone that I think has a lot of perspective on this. So thank you for sharing that today. I want to hand things over to Jason now to give us some of his thoughts and some of his story.
Great, Rebecca. So in terms of Kindred Healthcare, for those that are more local, as Rebecca mentioned, we're a specialty hospital company. It's been quite an evolution. We were the largest home health and hospice provider in the country, and several years ago spun that off to Humana. At a previous time, we're also the largest skilled nursing facility provider in the country as well. And our business, like everything, we talk about transformation, evolution, has now become this specialty hospital strategy around rehabilitation, critical care medicine, and behavioral, largely because that's where a lot of both aging healthcare in America is moving, as well as with the behavioral and mental health crisis our country is going through. So, that's informed us and driven our strategy into these areas. But the other part, and as we talk about startups and corporations partnering together, we too have built on a partnership model, largely around joint ventures with best-in-class health systems like U of L Health here in our backyard. And so with that has been partnerships with not-for-profit, academic, and community health systems. And that's really been an accelerator for us in terms of our digital innovation process. And, even taking some of Detlef's comments, is that innovation to us can range everything from, optimization and, change management, which I think is really around that digitization component. And then the digitalization of, that's more of the transformation. That's more of the breakthrough parts of innovation. And as I kind of grew in the company, I started as really a one hospital operator to then running our fastest growth business in rehabilitation. And now as president and CEO of the organization, saw our mindset as Kindred change. At the larger point, we were an $8 billion organization and, 4 operating divisions. Arguably, we're more of a holdings company with 4 distinct operating divisions. And the amount of digital spend and technology spend was very, it can be most of the time, besides some back office, very division specific. It was a lot of buying technology off the shelf and jamming it into our operating model. As an operator, I found that as, sometimes a culture killer. It also, sometimes didn't address really the needs of our unique operating model and our niche in healthcare. And, these can be examples of, Salesforce platforms to, other types of really even healthcare centered platforms that were really good for big hospital systems, but not good for the types of, what we call post-acute care or behavioral niches that we were in. So this has kind of started to really push the conversation amongst Ben Breyer, our CEO, our newer CIO, Charlie Wardrip, who, even though he had been in the organization in lower leadership roles, but now as the CIO of our company, and then myself, we started to really push on bringing startups into that, as Detlef was saying, into the digitalization part of this, this transformation breakthrough part of it, because that's where we saw the nimbleness, the way that rather than the tail wagging the dog, operations with its sets of problems and patient care needs was able to start bringing and collaborating with, startups that could now solve for the unique Kindred environment that we were in, adapt to the culture of our operators. And that we found it was a real satisfier for, not only just our operators, but our physicians and ultimately the patients and their families. And so, we're definitely on this innovation journey around, yes, digitizing. We are a very analog healthcare world that we live in, right? It's very manual, and arguably even post-acute care and behavioral health are even trailing behind that of the acute world. And so So when I say acute world, what our hospitals like Norton and Baptist and others are doing. And so we want to be best in class. We want to create differentiation that way. Obviously, we talk about data management between consumers and payers and providers. So that's another area of innovation. And then, we talk about our electronic health record, and that's really about managing an episode of care for our clinicians and physicians, and ultimately incorporates those two previous areas. And then, really the idea of mobile and consumer, right, is that, consumers are becoming more powerful and enabled in this healthcare environment. They need that transparency. And so I'll use an example here of how startup is able to help drive us in that direction. And then really internal communications. Most of our clinicians do not use email to be successful in their day-to-day job at the bedside or at the gym side, right? And so how do we have more unique ways of communicating that meet our employees where they are in this unique in this healthcare environment? So those are kind of probably our 5 big areas of innovation and hopefully transformation and breakthroughs. So I'll start with a story is my father, who's almost 40 years, is a Mayo Clinic cardiologist, took a fall when he turned 72, broke his C1, C2, a major fracture. This happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota. They live in Jacksonville, Florida. And ultimately, that's where this healthcare journey began. And at that same time, I was president of our rehab division, touching well over 250,000 rehab patients a year, including spinal cord injury, and saw this frustrating, experience that I was having of communication with healthcare providers. Dad, even though we're a very healthcare literate family, we were confused. We were trying to coordinate care, see Dad's progress through. And then I started to reflect on what all of our patients are going through in this healthcare journey, no matter how sick or ill or hurt they are. And it really drove me to start going, how do we better communicate in real time through maybe mobile application with our family members and ultimately also our patients as they're going through that rehab journey, just like my dad was going through. And, I worked with Charlie and we went to Fitbit. We went to Apple and just started to find out that this was just something that either they weren't focused on or they wanted to jam their product or their way of doing it into this process. And ultimately, actually I went to Northwestern University at Kellogg School of Management, and one of my innovation and products and services professors had a company, Digital Intent, and we started with their startup out of Chicago, and we had them really walk the walk of our clinicians, our patients, create a digital storyboard, and ultimately this developed an app called Rehab Tracker, which is at over 100,000 patients and families engaged with it, and that is a story of where you could go to the big guys or you could start with a startup and really work and solve a problem. And ultimately now 2 of our divisions have taken off over the course of these last 2 years with this product, and it's really changed our value proposition to families as they're trying to decide whether they want to come to a Kindred or one of our joint ventures or to a competitor, right? And that's just an example. And then ultimately, it's what payers want to see, their beneficiaries, and that transparency that creates a better patient experience. So we started to come around here at Kindred to say we want to be a great technology company that provides an amazing patient experience, right? And I'm sure Disney says the same thing in their space, and Southwest Airlines says the same thing in their space. We want to be that in this niche of post-acute care and behavioral care. And so, I take that with, our partnerships are going to be with startups like Lorenzo's organization, all the way to the Microsoft, Wipro, SAP world, just depending on what we're trying to solve for. But this idea of transformation and breakthrough, we find that we're having a lot more success with our startup partners around that. So I mentioned Digital Intent. Here in town also is Interact, led by Ankur Gopal and his organization. We've been able to develop compliance applications as well as some applications that have helped us get through the pandemic and manage great safety and quality through that. And once again, Ankur's company was able to adapt to our culture, what we needed to do in our joint venture space, and create real working solutions for that. And so, as we talk about Lorenzo and C-Plan.IT, the other part is Kindred spends over $100 million between software, its hardware, and these are big decisions. And as Ben and I have always said, it feels like a lot of these decisions are gut and feel, right? We're going to make this investment because we think, or we're going to make this investment because we see a competitor or a like-minded company moving in that investment space. And that's not always the best way to go, right? Because especially in healthcare, we see organizations, particularly in electronic health records, spend hundreds of millions of dollars going down one path only to switch and reverse course and then call that all sunk cost. And you just cannot afford to do that, at least in our space of healthcare, which very late razor thin margins, and those can be fatal mistakes for an organization. And so as we partner with Lorenzo, it's probably the age-old adage, not just in healthcare, but many industries and sectors, is what is my return on invested capital when I make these investments? I know when I buy a hospital or start up a hospital, I know my ROIC on that. And it's much harder to measure that when we make all these technology spends, because it's man, woman, and technology coming together. And there's so many variables, especially in healthcare, that are tied to that. But as we partner with C-Plan.IT, we're looking really at this idea of digital value management, right? Digital investment value management. And that is important for us to be disciplined users of our capital, not just when we make a asset acquisition or a startup hospital or a new partnership, but really around our technology spend. And so that's how we tie our key performance indicators, and and how we can continue to iterate on our technology or additional investments so that we continue to create better operational, financial, cultural outcomes for our organization. And so, we are very, very bent here, particularly at Kindred. It is about taking care of our Louisville ecosystem, fostering innovation in our own backyard. Yes, we will be using organizations from around the country, but we want to do more with the C-Plan.ITs and the InterApps of the world, that we can create that, corporation and startup partnership here. And, and we're even doing that all the way into investments with U of L Health around technology and transformation with our Hive location, which is bringing our students and professors together to solve our healthcare and aging population issues. And we're even pushing it down into what we call our honeycombs, which we started our first one right before the pandemic at Manual High School with a Hive-like experience at U of L into the high school setting. So we want to start with our younger generation and start to really have them excited about staying here in Louisville and seeing that big corporations want startups. Hopefully that inspires them to be startup founders or participants in this process. So we mean it when we say it, and hopefully there's examples. But Kindred is growing wonderfully, and what that is doing is really bringing other partners from around the country who want to do business with us, want to joint venture with us, because they see us as leading edge in this post-acute and behavioral space. And it's our startups that are helping accelerate and create that value proposition.
Thank you for that, Jason, and for leading as an example of corporate commitment to startups here in Louisville. It's very important, and that leading by example and that peer-to-peer ability to explain why it's important to a corporation like yours is going to be key to this effort being successful. So you've talked a ton about C-Plan.IT. So without further ado, Lorenzo, would you like to share your story with us?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. So obviously, I'm the startup guy on the panel, in case you didn't notice, because I'm the geek with a headset. As a matter of fact, it's a gaming headset. Anyway, I'm a recent transplant to Louisville, Kentucky. Last 22 years in Silicon Valley, and the C-Plan is the 5th B2B startup that I'm involved with. So I've been doing this startup corporate partnership, which I call innovation partnerships, for all those years, and I certainly have the scars to show for it. So I would like to kind of share with you, from a startup perspective, kind of 3 lessons that may be useful for the startups, but also for the corporates to understand kind of a perspective of a startup. So the first one is you got to understand how critical these innovation partnerships are. I believe after 5 of them that this is the most critical thing for the success of a startup. I think it's even much more important than the product itself, the technology, and even raising capital. I've been involved in raising probably $350 million VC and funding. That's never the problem. Actually, I'll give you an example later. Sometimes it is a problem. So I think nothing else matters for this. And why is that? Well, number one, there's this fancy terminology called product market fit these days, but it's basically, are you solving as a startup a problem that is worth solving, and does the solution fit? That's the number one thing. The only way you can figure that out is with a real example. But then the next thing, you have to actually validate the value, measure the value. Of course, we are in the business of measuring values, it's pretty obvious. But no matter what, all these examples, it doesn't matter the technology works. The question is, what is the value? And the first early customers are critical, because if you can't determine the value there, it's just not going to scale. The third thing is that, these tools, you have to use software. Some software is designed great, some is not. The only way you can figure out is when you put a real user in front of the software and see what is that experience like from that perspective. And last but not least, is certainly the best way to raise funds, because every dollar you raise from a venture capitalist is dilution for everybody in the company. So if you can get customers, obviously that's a much better way. However, you need to pick the right partner. And that's the one thing. Every startup person says, oh, I got a good customer. Yeah, but be careful. I learned that the hard way, and a very expensive way. It's a lesson that costed me $103 million in 1999. So not peanuts, okay? So 22 years ago, we raised 103 and we failed. It's one of my failures. I've done 2 IPOs. I do have a massive failure. We were early on in cloud. Cloud is now overage, but we didn't exist back there. We were one of the first in the world to do ERP in the cloud, and we took off. We started signing up customers in the Valley. We thought we were rocking and rolling. That's why we raised 103 million. But guess what? You go outside of a valley and the thing was just a lead balloon. But we didn't think about that. We didn't understand that. And so, after a while, we had to shut the thing off and move on. We picked wrongly folks that were highly predisposed. Instead, you got to go to whoever is your market. Now, interesting enough, I thought, oh my God, I failed. I'm going to be dead. Instead, the lead VC that lost most money out of that said, hey, wait a minute. Now you learned this lesson. You're on the next one. And the next one is the one that Detlef described, E2 Open. We were very specific. I mean, when I first met Detlef in his office in Vodafone and he crawled on the table to get a coffee, I says, that's our man. It's the same way as the first conversation we had with Jason. You got to know what you're looking for and you got to find the right people. And I'm going to tell you that a little more in detail later on. So number one, you got to have it. I don't care, if you're especially a techie guy, I'm an engineer by training. It's easy to fall in love with technology. But when I look at startup as an investor or I do due diligence for VC, number one thing, who are those early innovation partners? Number two is you got to know as a startup, who are the people you're looking for? And you don't know at the beginning. It's a bit of a search to figure out what it is. Let's use our case. We're solving a problem that has been around since I've been in business. Charlie told me he has lived with it for 40 years. So obviously, how to measure ROI for investment in digital technology, it's a big problem. Good, we got that covered. But when we started going down this path, we thought, oh, the CIO must be the right person. And definitely people like Charlie appreciate the problem. But it took us a while to sink in and realize, yeah, but they don't really own the problem in the way that a Jason does or a Detlef does. So you got to go to the CEO, COO, president, or whatever that really cares, especially those that have to then present to, let's say, a private equity board or a set of investors and actually say, hey, this is what I'm getting for 100 million, 200 million, $1 billion, whatever it is, a digital budget. And then the other thing is, it's not about selling to them, it's actually interviewing them. I don't know if Jason remembers the first conversation we had. I didn't sell. I was going to ask very specific question. I said, well, based on your industry, you probably spend 100 million because everybody knows the average. So how do you measure that ROI? And that's it. Then Jason took off. He resonated right away. But then I asked another question. How do you know that investment is really driving you to this disruptive digital transformation? And usually then I pause because you have two kind of answer. One is you go silence, and then you go, okay, this is not the right one. Or you get a great story. To be honest with you, when Jason told me his story, I said, okay, maybe I should invest in this. Now I understand why. I know the guy's a Francisco partner in San Francisco. I go, okay, now they made a lot of money. Now I know why they invested in Kindred. So you gotta know we do that. We also have an assessment we go through. You got to really be specific on who as a startup you want to do business with. It can be, oh, just finding me anybody. What is the characteristics? And that's one dimension. The second thing you got to figure out, when we started, we knew that we had to figure out, okay, we got some. How many do we need? Well, if you look at our product, it's a combination of an analytics application and an AI application. If you know anything about AI, you need to train AI. By itself is actually not so intelligent. And so we have to figure out how much data do we need. And so we know that we need to find about 15 to 20 companies, and they have to be in the same cohort. So a big question, which cohort? Of course, I came from Silicon Valley. I can find a bunch of them in Silicon Valley, but something didn't resonate. Well, the big thing is the degree of transformation in the Valley, that kind of past it, is not so significant as the transformation in healthcare, which, by the way, not really our background traditionally, but eventually became obvious that, guess what, healthcare, and we did a bunch of research, healthcare is recognized as the #1 industry in terms of the degree of transformation that will happen in any industry. It used to be manufacturing when I started, like Detlef grew up in. It used to be financial services. I think healthcare is the place. And then this is where luck happens. I call luck where preparation meets opportunity. Who would have known that? I came to Louisville for personal reasons, and it turns out that Louisville is, I think, the center, the hub of digital transformation. And when you listen to Tammy next, you'll know why I believe that. And Louisville also as a center geographically, if you combine, Cincinnati, Tennessee, Nashville, and Indianapolis, and so on. It's like, if you want to do semiconductors like Detlef, you have to be in Silicon Valley. At least it used to be, because all the semiconductor engineers are there. I believe if you are the core of healthcare transformation, Louisville is a fantastic place to be. Certainly a good place for C-Plan.IT. Hence why we're going to raise the money from Silicon Valley, but we're going to do the work here because this is where the innovation is coming. So that's the second point. You got to know what you're looking for. The third thing you got to know is, though, that the problem with startup and corporate partnership is they're designed to fail. You got to understand that. Why? Because companies like Vodafone, like Kindred, are hundreds of people whose sole job is to avoid mistakes. I mean, they have to do that. That's why they're, public company. It's why they're successful, by the way, especially in healthcare. The last thing you want is somebody to do a mistake there. Well, the problem is a startup, it's about innovation. And contrary to popular belief, it's not like an entrepreneur like me wakes up one morning as this fantastic idea. It's just a series of experimentation. The majority of them don't work, and you learn. So failure is part of innovation. I can't get you a product that is interesting unless I fail. So by definition, imagine trying to put this thing together. And in my experience, the only way it works is when you find in these companies some innovative, visionary leader like Detlef or like Jason that understand the power for their own benefit. They understand the power that innovation can do to their business and are willing to manage the natural conflict and set that leadership. If you don't find that, I guarantee you will fail. I've worked with very large companies, even investor of ours, like an IBM, very difficult unless you find the right person, and becomes challenging in those organizations. So that's my third advice. So, as a startup guy, know why it's critical. Quite frankly, if you don't have that, I don't think you're going to make it. Second of all, work really hard to understand what kind of company, what industry is going to be successful for you. And third, make sure in those companies there is the right leader, otherwise they will fail. And those are my 3 pieces of advice. And Rebecca, back to you.
Thank you for all of those efforts, Lorenzo. I can say firsthand, I really appreciate all you're doing to bring this to Louisville. So critically important and the exact right time. So we're glad we're stealing you from Silicon Valley. So now I'm going to hand things over to Tammy to talk with us today. And Tammy, all yours.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. And it's so interesting just hearing my other panelists, and I think it really describes the need for that innovation, kind of economy and that cycle and that connection with the corporates and the people that need the solutions and how you approach it. At LHCC, we, as Rebecca stated at the beginning, we're 12 major healthcare companies. We represent, 100 billion in revenue, 400,000 employees nationally, all cite us here. And this group of CEOs put themselves together as this board. A lot of people have said, oh, when you founded the council, I didn't. I was recruited to the role, and it really intrigued me because they decided to be in the room together to say, how can we take our collective strength? Because we know as healthcare aging innovation companies, the challenges we're facing with an aging nation, and to leverage the cluster and the collective strengths of our organizations for economic vibrancy for Louisville. So when we started on this journey, it was really fascinating. I came from the corporate world, where we looked for the innovations, and I thought that I was pretty good at it with some of the innovative stuff we did. And I realized after being in this role how bad I sucked actually at innovation and how to vet innovations and really bring value to the organization, because when you start on a journey, the council in itself was a startup. We were a funded startup. We had that seed funding from the council companies who funded this. But, when I joined and they did the press release that I was joining as president and CEO, I'm like, do we have a website or an email or a phone, a pen, a desk? Nothing. So it was building it from scratch. So I came from an environment that I had entire units who did those things, and a very powerful board of directors who have units who do those things, to a startup that we needed to build in every aspect of the word. And it gave me a unique perspective that I'm very grateful for, because when we're together as our board, and this is a group of very engaged CEOs. By the bylaws, they said only the CEO of the organization serves on our board of directors. We have deep engagement with our council companies on our initiatives and activities. And as we came together and really charted our path forward, which we built together with this board, the perspectives that they brought with that, I understood. And I think it made me a lot more effective in helping shape how we went about something like the council as a startup, to be effective for the innovators and to be effective for better health outcomes, for an aging nation, which is at the core of everything we do with the council companies. So with those, that kind of setup in mind, as we went about, the work of the council and what we wanted to be, we realized that it really centered around innovation. We needed to move towards an innovation economy, and we started building out what ultimately we called the innovation engine, the healthcare innovation engine. And that was first to just have conversations and really identify by the prioritization that our CEOs set with where our focus would be. What was the greatest need? They came together and said, let's chart a 5-year path. And 2019, our focus was caregiver, informal caregiver. 2020, social determinants of health. 2021, were patient education and engagement. 2022, interoperability. And it feels almost prophetic, actually, with the lineup that they set, because again, these prioritizations were set in 2018. So when you look at SDOH and the spotlighting that we've had, in the last year with the pandemic and everything else, at the time, social determinants of health almost felt like a buzzword, right? Or a buzz phrase, like population health. What does that really mean? So what we realized as the council was, we need to have an understanding of the needs of these council companies. How do you currently approach innovation? Who are your subject matter experts under that topic? Caregiving, social determinants. Let's get them in the room together and let's have a conversation. What are you doing in this space? You've identified that these are your biggest challenges and where you have needs. So, as we set out, we started our discovery labs to really uncover and discover how do you approach innovation, what works, what doesn't, let's identify gaps. Then we moved to looking at that across the continuum, because one of the unique things with LHCC is that we're able to approach things from a real systems approach and system solution, because we have the entire line of sight from when you enter through X event through end of life, represented on the council with the payers, providers, the long-term acute care, the hospitals, end of life, and everything in between. And so having that vantage point, after we did those discovery labs, we said, okay, let's look at that across that council, and let's really hone in and define where there's opportunity across that whole continuum and where there are gaps. And ultimately then refined that, built networks through our work with expertise that we needed to engage to reach the solutions. Once we identified what they were, then you have to reach the people that have them and make that interesting. So we developed partnerships with organizations like Aging 2.0 and ecosystem partners here. There's a lot of work that goes on with amazing organizations in Louisville that we don't need to recreate. So it's both local and national. And so, doing that, and right now as the council, we're at deployment. We did the call for innovations and took the mystery out of what the corporates need. So, there were already buy-in from the healthcare because these were their words. These were their summary reports that does this reflect what you're saying, both on an individual and then a systems level. And then looking for the innovations and the interventions that filled that. And then most critically important is where we are now. We launched our first paid pilots Monday across the system. To really, understand and through the metrics vet the efficacy of not only the intervention on the better health outcomes, but also the process for how you deploy interventions. How could we as LHCC bridge the gap and be that cultural interpreter, corporate to innovator? And we, now are really excited about where we are. We have a very engaged, passionate innovation committee, steering committee, who are made up of these corporates. We have the programs and the partners that work with the entrepreneurs. And then, the last piece of it as we go will be to bank and through centralized data and the centralized data hub, which we haven't found anything that exists like it, in the nation, in the world. Actually, we have the ability to lay down a data-driven evidence base that can help inform where should investments be. When we talked earlier about the ROI and we talked about, the challenge and why things are abandoned, and because it does, better health outcomes are at the core. But when there's not alignment between the initiatives and, the company, when it's the payer receives, the ROI. But the company has the access, the providers have the access. That needs to be realigned. So that evidence base is very important. And so that kind of lays the groundwork for our work, and how we're approaching this. And we're extremely excited about now the other pieces of this, which are mentoring by those that have done it. We have a chairman's circle who said, as we identify these solutions, ours are product ready, solutions that need to scale. We want it to be that we don't lose these companies, to other cities outside of Louisville, unless it's a strategic, reason that we're the thought leadership to do that. So it's the access to capital, a strategic investment fund, and the mentoring by the people that have done it. Those who have had exits, who have built successful healthcare companies, and we have a passionate group of founders and corporates to do that. For us, it's from an education and wearing kind of both hats from the startup world and then the corporate world. I always say, even when corporates are doing very innovative things, and many of our council companies, Kindred, is incredibly innovative. And the council companies, I always say, you all have said in your words, you either spend so much time vetting, solutions that really aren't a fit at all, because it's the product bringing it to you, as an innovator, and let's shove this in. You want my product, you need this pen, and the corporates are going, I don't need a pen. We love our pen, but we need this over here, and then on the other side, because it is so daunting, and I realized this from my time at Delta Dental, you lose as corporates the ability to engage the right interventions and innovations, and your competitors pick them up. So, bridging that gap and doing it in the right way. So we remind from the corporate, these are your words. This is what you need. You need these solutions. If you could do it yourself, it wouldn't be a gap, right? So you need the innovators who are out building that and doing it. You just need the right innovators. And then we have to caution the innovators, look, be mindful of where you are, and be mindful and listen and do discovery. if Jason, Zachariah is at the movies with his family, he doesn't want you sitting next to him with your iPad going through your latest solution that if he just saw it, he would absolutely want, or, and I jest with that, but it's true. So I'm going to pause there because I know we just have a few minutes left and turn it back over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Tammy. I had no idea you didn't want to sit next to Jason at the movies, so appreciate that. Poor Jason.
I do. I just don't want to bother him with my PowerPoint presentation of our innovation engine. I think Laura would be upset.
All right. Well, thank you for all you're doing for Louisville. If you guys don't know Tammy, she does so much work in our community and important. So I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists. You have all shared such great information to help, I think, all of our attendees better understand the really incredible opportunities of collaboration between corporations and startups. And so I know we've got about 2 minutes here, and I've got 4 of you. So I would say, to close, what is one quick piece of advice each of you would have for corporations that are contemplating collaboration with a startup? Jason, let's start with you.
Yeah, I would say allow them to be a part of that discovery process. You might think you have that problem. Let them hone it in, make you more aware, because it will open your eyes to a ton of stuff. And make sure you have a good program management office around it, because it is that leader at the top who's passionate, but you got to have that whole village within the corporation wanting to foster that entrepreneurship with that startup company. So you have to have a good PMO office and good check-ins along the way so things don't get stalled out.
Excellent. Lorenzo?
Well, I'll share one story because I have been on the corporate side. So I come to Silicon Valley, and the guy I worked for goes, we're going to meet these 2 engineers. They got some cool technology on video compression. And I go, what the hell do I care about video compression? Anyway, so yeah, okay, we help them out. We define their problem. And then this guy goes, hey, I'm going to invest. I go, what, you're going to invest these 2 guys? Are you nuts? I mean, I don't know anything about it. Little did I know that's how Silicon Valley works. Well, you may know those 2 guys. If any of you use WebEx, those were the founders of WebEx. We were the very first customer. We were the very first pilot. I said, forget it, I'm not going to do that. Well, since then, when you look at these, it's important to at least negotiate it in the terms that either from a corporate or individual perspective. In the Valley, individual can do that, because I can name all the ones that have gone public over the last 10 years. I can tell you who personally made money out of that. If you can, take advantage of it.
Excellent. Detlef, over to you.
Yeah, maybe a quick one. I think not everything you start will fly. And if something doesn't fly, be brave enough to cut it and say, this is it. And I give you one example. In Vodafone, we tried to establish demand management, and we weren't able to get it flying. So then we had to stop throwing money after bad money, good money after bad money. And instead of that, we turned it around and said, let's connect to the budget processing and be basically at the source of information to then understand how much we have to buy by when. So what I mean to say is, try to have the holistic view. Don't get bound with what you started, because sometimes it might have been the wrong approach. Stop it, get it wider, start again.
Awesome. Tammy?
All right, for the corporates engaging with startups, involve your end user at the very beginning as well as the innovator. That often happens way down the road. And if you run through the entire pipe, like Jason, talked about with the need with his father, it gave him a different perspective of that whole journey. Do that with anything that you're looking at as an intervention. Almost look at it as a mini system, and engage every user along the way. And that's my piece.
Awesome. And I would just add, from the chamber perspective, my advice would be open to the introductions when they come your way. Appoint somebody in your walls that is the right person to have that conversation, so you're not approaching the wrong person. Put a bucket of money over here every year that you say, we're going to use this to test these out for the right thing. And it may not always be that, but that's okay. So just be open to the idea and make this part of your business plan. Plan for everything. So why not plan for innovation and opportunities that can make your business better? So I know we're a couple minutes past time here. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Thank you so much to the four of you for sharing your stories and your advice with us today. I think we all have a very different perspective on the opportunities that lie here in Louisville. And I think you guys probably have somewhere else to jump to in your next meeting. So thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you.
Great job,
Take care.
Rebecca.
Ciao, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.